The smallest bobcat kitten ever seen was so tiny, no one believed it could survive. Even the experts said it was hopeless, too weak, too fragile, too far gone. But one vet refused to let go. What started as a fight for life became a battle against time and against those who wanted the kitten gone for good. But when a shocking discovery reveals the truth about why this little creature was struggling, everything changes. The risk isn't just unthinkable, it's impossible. Yet sometimes, the impossible is the only option left. How far would you go to save a life everyone else has already given up on? And what happens when the fight to save one fragile heartbeat puts everything on the line? Before we start, take a moment to comment your name or city. It's my way of remembering that behind each play is a real heartbeat. The Montana wilderness stretched endlessly under the cold morning sky. It's ancient. Pines standing like silent guardians over the landscape. Wildlife officers Tom Martinez and Sarah Chen trudged through the fresh snow, their boots crunching with each careful step. The bitter February wind whipped around them as they followed up on reports of illegal trapping activity in the area. Over here, Sarah's voice cut through the stillness. Tom hurried to where his partner stood, their breath forming clouds in the frigid air. There, caught in the cruel metal teeth of an illegal trap, lay a female bobcat. Her beautiful fur was matted with blood, her breathing shallow and labored. "This isn't right," Tom muttered, his weathered face creasing with concern. These traps were banned in this area years ago. He knelt beside the dying creature, his gloved hands hovering helplessly over her broken body. Sarah swept her flashlight beam across the surrounding area, its yellow glow cutting through the early morning shadows. A soft sound caught her attention, barely audible above the whisper of wind through the trees. "Tom," she called out softly, "I think I hear something." They followed the sound to a hollow beneath a fallen log. There, huddled together for warmth, lay 4 tiny bobcat kittens. Their eyes were still sealed shut, their spotted fur still damp from birth. But it was the smallest one that made both officers pause in disbelief. "I've never seen one this small," Sarah whispered, carefully lifting the tiny creature. It fit entirely in her palm, hardly bigger than a mouse. "It's like it's half the size it should be." Tom shook his head grimly. "That little one won't make it. Nature can be cruel that way." But protocol was protocol, and with their mother beyond saving, all 4 kittens would need to be transported to the nearest wildlife hospital, 20 miles away. Dr. Lenora Harker was just starting her shift at the Montana Wildlife Medical Center. When she got the call, she pressed her fingers against her temples, trying to ward off the headache she could feel building. The last thing she needed was another hopeless case. The loss of the endangered lynx 2 months ago still haunted her, its accusing eyes following her into her dreams. "Dr. Harker," her assistant's voice pulled her from her thoughts. "They're here with the bobcat kittens." Leanie pushed herself up from her desk, straightening her white coat more out of habit than necessity. In the examination room, 4 tiny bodies lay in a heated container, their small forms barely moving. 3 of them looked typical for newborn bobcats, about the size of a guinea pig with strong vital signs despite their ordeal. But the 4th one, Leanie's breath caught in her throat as she lifted the smallest kitten. It was impossibly tiny, fitting perfectly in her cupped palm. She could feel its heart fluttering like a trapped butterfly beneath paper-thin skin. "That one's not gonna make it," Dr. Matthews, her colleague, stated flatly from the doorway. "We should focus our resources on the viable ones." Leanie felt something spark inside her, a mixture of defiance and determination she hadn't experienced since before the lynx incident. She studied the tiny creature in her hands, noting how, despite its size, it moved with surprising strength, its miniature paws kneading the air. "Every life deserves a chance," she said quietly, her voice firm, despite her colleague's dismissive snort. "You're wasting your time, Harker," Matthews called over his shoulder as he left. "Some things are just broken to fix." Leanie knew he wasn't just talking about the kitten. The whispers around the hospital hadn't stopped since she lost the lynx, about how she'd lost her edge, how she was too emotionally invested, how she should stick to routine cases. But as she cradled the tiny bobcat kitten, feeling its determined heartbeat against her palm, something shifted inside her. This wasn't just about saving a wild animal anymore. This impossibly small creature, fighting against all odds to survive, struck a chord deep within her. "Well, little one," she whispered, carefully placing the kitten in a separate incubator set to the perfect temperature. "They said the same thing about me after the lynx incident. Maybe we can prove them wrong together." She began setting up the special feeding equipment they'd need. The smallest tubes they had would still be too big for this tiny fighter. As she worked, Leanie felt the familiar weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. But this time it was different. This time, it felt like hope. The 3 larger kittens mewed softly in their incubator, strong and vital despite their ordeal. but it was their tiny sibling that kept drawing Leanie's gaze, its small form rising and falling with each determined breath. Against all logic and medical experience, this impossibly small creature was holding on to life with everything it had. Leanie pulled up a chair beside the incubator, her notes spread across her lap. She knew the long hours ahead would test her resolve, her skills, and her already fragile confidence. But looking at the tiny fighter before her, she felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Purpose. "Okay, little one," she said softly, preparing the first of what would be many careful feedings. "Let's show them what impossible really means." The wildlife hospital's fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across tired faces. As the staff gathered in the examination room, Dr. Lenora Harker stood at the metal table, her weathered hands gentle as she assessed the tiny Bobcat Kitten. The creature was impossibly small, barely the size of her palm, its fragile body hardly moving except for the faintest rise and fall of breath. "Leanie," Dr. Thompson, her colleague, spoke softly from across the table. "You know as well as I do that this one won't make it. The humane thing would be to end its suffering now." Leanie's jaw tightened. She'd heard those words before, too recently, when they lost the endangered lynx despite weeks of round-the-clock care. The memory of that failure still burned, fresh and raw. But something about this tiny fighter struck a chord deep within. "Hurt no," she said firmly, surprising even herself with the strength in her voice. "We're not giving up on this one." Dr. Thompson exchanged meaningful glances with the other staff members. "Look, I know the lynx was hard on you, but this has nothing to do with the lynx," Leanie cut in, though they both knew it wasn't entirely true. She carefully lifted the kitten, cradling it close to her chest. "Every life matters, even the smallest ones." The senior veterinarian sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. "The resources, the time, the effort, all for what? That kitten is too weak to even nurse properly. You're setting yourself up for another heartbreak." Leanie felt the familiar wave of self-doubt crash over her. The lynx's death had shaken her confidence to its core, making her question every decision since. But looking down at the tiny creature in her hands, she felt something else rising up, determination, fierce and unwavering. "Then I'll bottle feed it myself," she declared. "Every 2 hours, day and night. I'll take full responsibility." The room fell silent. Everyone knew what she was taking on. The exhausting schedule, the likely disappointment, the emotional toll. They'd all seen it before with the lynx, how it had nearly broken her. "Leanie," Dr. Thompson's voice was gentler now, concerned. "You haven't fully recovered from I'm doing this," she stated, leaving no room for argument. "This kitten deserves a chance." Moving to the preparation area, Leanie began gathering supplies, special formula, tiny bottles, heating pads. Her colleagues gradually dispersed, their silence speaking volumes about their doubts. She could feel their pitying glances, hear their whispered conversations about her judgment being clouded by past failure. The first feeding attempt was disheartening. The kitten's mouth was so small that even the smallest bottle nipple seemed enormous. Milk dribbled uselessly down its chin as it struggled weakly against the bottle. "Come on, little one," Leanie whispered, adjusting the angle slightly, "just a few drops. That's all we need." Another try. More spilled formula. The kitten's movements grew weaker, and Leanie felt panic rising in her chest. She couldn't fail again. Not like this, not so soon. Not so soon. She tried different positions, different bottles, different techniques. Minutes stretched into hours as she persisted, her back aching from hunching over the examination table. Each failed attempt felt like another weight on her shoulders, another whisper of doubt in her mind. But she refused to give up. When the kitten finally managed to swallow a tiny amount of formula, Leanie's eyes welled with tears of relief. It wasn't much, barely enough to count as a successful feeding, but it was something, a start. A tiny victory against impossible odds. "That's it," she encouraged softly, watching the kitten's throat work as it swallowed. "You're stronger than they think. We both are." The rest of the day passed in a blur of feeding attempts, each one a battle against despair. Some were more successful than others, but none could be called easy. As evening approached, Leanie's determination remained unshaken, even as exhaustion crept into her bones. She set up a small station near the incubator where the kitten would stay, knowing she'd be back every 2 hours throughout the night. Her colleagues watched her preparations with a mixture of concern and resignation, clearly believing she was fighting a losing battle. But as Leanie looked down at the tiny creature, now sleeping peacefully under the warm light of the incubator, she felt a spark of hope. This wasn't just about saving one small life anymore. It was about proving that sometimes, against all odds and logical arguments, the impossible could become possible. That even the smallest, most fragile beings deserved a chance to fight for life. She gently stroked the kitten's fur with one finger, its tiny body rising and falling with each breath. "We're going to prove them wrong," she whispered. "Both of us together." The days melted together as Leanie devoted herself to the tiny Bobcat Kitten's care. Her office became a makeshift nursery, complete with heating pads and soft blankets carefully arranged in a small incubator. Every 2 hours, without fail, she prepared the special formula, warming it to exactly the right temperature. "Come on, little one," she whispered, cradling the fragile creature. The kitten's mouth barely opened as she tried to feed it with a tiny syringe. Most of the formula dribbled down its chin, and Leanie's heart sank as she watched another feeding attempt fail. Dark circles grew under her eyes as the sleepless night stretched on. Her colleagues watched with growing concern as she pushed herself to exhaustion. They saw her slumped over her desk between feedings, case files untouched, her usual meticulous notes replaced by hurried scribbles tracking the kitten's minimal progress. Then came the night. That changed everything. Leanie had just finished the 11 o'clock feeding when she noticed something wrong. The kitten, usually responsive even in its weakness, lay completely still in its warming nest. Her hands trembled as she reached for it. No, she breathed, feeling for a heartbeat. Nothing. The tiny chest wasn't moving. "Don't you dare. Give up on me now." With shaking fingers, she laid the kitten on a clean towel. The creature looked even smaller in death, its fur still damp from the failed feeding. But Leanie refused to accept it. She began chest compressions with her index finger, pressing with the lightest touch possible against the delicate ribcage. "Fight," she urged, tears blurring her vision. "You have to fight." 1 minute passed, then 2. Leanie kept working, alternating between gentle compressions and using a tiny tube to breathe for the kitten. Her world narrowed to the singular focus, the rhythm of pressing down, the count in her head, the desperate prayer with each breath she gave. Finally, after what felt like hours but was really just minutes, she felt it, the faintest flutter. Beneath her fingers, the kitten gave a weak gasp, then another. Color slowly returned to its tiny pink nose. Leanie sagged against the table, her legs barely holding her up. She gathered the kitten close, wrapping it in fresh warm blankets, her own hands shaking from adrenaline and relief. The victory was short-lived. "Dr. Harker." The sharp voice cut through her exhausted haze. Dr. Warren Kessler stood in the doorway of her office, his silver hair immaculate despite the late hour, his suit as crisp as ever. "A word, please." She followed him to his office, reluctant to leave the kitten even for a moment. The hallway lights buzzed overhead as they walked, casting strange shadows on the sterile walls. Kessler settled behind his imposing desk, gesturing for her to sit. She remained standing. "This has gone far enough," he said, his voice clipped. "I've been reviewing the resources you've dedicated to this project of yours, the overtime hours, the specialized formula, the energy consumption from running the incubator around the clock." He shuffled through some papers on his desk. "It's excessive. I'm using my own time." Leanie defended, her voice hoarse from lack of sleep. "And the supplies are minimal compared to. This isn't about the monetary cost alone." Kessler cut in. "It's about image, about professionalism." His eyes narrowed. "Your attachment to this animal is concerning. We're a scientific institution, not a pet shelter." "This has nothing to do with attachment," Leanie said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "It's about giving every animal a fighting chance, like the lynx." Kessler's words hit their mark. Leanie flinched. "We can't afford another high-profile failure. Dr. Harker, our donors expect results, not emotional crusades. The kitten is stable now," she insisted, though the memory of the night's close call was still fresh. "It's showing improvement, barely," Kessler interrupted. "And at what cost? Your other cases are suffering. Your reports are late. This fixation is becoming a liability." He leaned forward, his expression hard. "I'm giving you 48 hours to wrap this up. Either the kitten shows significant improvement, or we proceed with the humane option." "That's final." Leanie stood there, her fists clenched at her sides. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, matching the buzzing in her ears. Everything in her wanted to argue, to fight back against this cold calculation of life and death. But she knew Kessler held all the power here. "Understood," she managed to say, though the word tasted bitter in her mouth. As she walked back to her office, her steps echoing in the empty hallway, Leanie felt the weight of the challenge ahead. The kitten's near-death experience had shown her just how precarious its hold on life was. But Kessler's opposition had awakened something else in her, a fierce determination that went beyond professional pride or personal redemption. She returned to find the kitten still breathing steadily in its warm nest, tiny paws twitching in sleep. Looking at it now, she made a silent promise. She would fight for this little life, not just against the odds of survival, but against the cold institutional logic that would dismiss it. as a lost cause, the fluorescent lights of the wildlife hospital buzzed overhead as Leanie hunched over her desk, reviewing the latest batch of test results. Her eyes burned from lack of sleep, but she couldn't stop now. The tiny Bobcat Kitten lay sleeping in its warming box beside her, its chest rising and falling with worrying irregularity. A sharp knock at her office door made her jump. Dr. Warren. Kessler stood in the doorway, his silver hair perfectly styled despite the late hour. His cold eyes swept over the medical equipment crowding her office before settling on her. With clear disapproval, "Dr. Harker," he said, his voice clipped. Word. Leanie straightened in her chair, unconsciously moving to block his view of the kitten. Of course. Kessler stepped inside, closing the door with deliberate slowness. "Your dedication is admirable, but this has gone far enough. We have 3 endangered wolves coming in tomorrow, and I need my best vet focused on cases that matter. Every case matters," Leanie replied, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Don't let emotion cloud your judgment." Kessler's words cut like ice. "You're still recovering from the lynx incident. I would hate to see another failure damage your reputation further." The mention of the lynx made Leanie's chest tighten, but she held his gaze. "This kitten deserves a chance. What it deserves is irrelevant. This hospital runs on results, Dr. Harker, on success rates that bring in funding." He gestured at the tiny patient. "That creature is consuming resources we can't afford to waste." Before Leanie could respond, a gentle tap interrupted them. Miles. Ortega stood in the doorway, holding 2 cups of coffee. The young intern's dark eyes took in the scene, and despite his usual shyness, he stepped forward. "Sorry to interrupt," he said, placing 1 cup on Leanie's desk. "But it's time for the 2-hour feeding." Kessler's lips thinned. "Consider what I've said. Dr. Harker." He turned and left, his expensive shoes clicking against the linoleum floor. Miles waited until the director was gone before letting out a long breath. "I thought you might need this," he said. Nodding to the coffee, Leanie managed a tired smile. "You're a lifesaver, Miles." Together, they began the delicate process of feeding the kitten. Miles held the tiny creature, while Leanie carefully administered formula through a specially modified syringe. His hands were steady, his movements gentle despite his youth. "Don't listen to them," Miles said quietly as they worked. "The other vets, they joke about your lost cause, but I think what you're doing is amazing. Amazing." Warmth bloomed in Leanie's chest at his words, different from the professional pride she usually felt. There was something in the way Miles looked at her, not just respect for a mentor, but something deeper she wasn't ready to name. The moment was broken by a concerning sound from the kitten, a wheezing gasp that seemed to take too much effort. Leanie frowned, setting aside the syringe. "Something's not right," she muttered, reaching for her stethoscope. "Hold her still for me." Miles complied, and Leanie listened carefully to the kitten's chest. What she heard made her blood run cold. Moving to the examination light, she positioned it carefully over the tiny body. "I need to do an x-ray," she said, already reaching for the portable machine she'd been using to monitor the kitten's development. Minutes later, the images confirmed her worst fears. The kitten's ribcage showed clear abnormalities, a congenital defect that was severely restricting its ability to breathe properly. Leanie stared at the x-rays, her heart sinking. "Is it bad?" Miles asked, standing close enough that she could feel his warmth. "The ribcage is malformed," Leanie explained, tracing the irregular bone structure with her finger. "It's compressing the lungs." Without surgery, she couldn't finish the sentence. Miles leaned in, studying the image. "Can you operate?" Leanie ran a hand through her hair. "On something this small, it's never been done. The risks would be." She shook her head. "One wrong move and we'd lose her. But if we don't try, we'll definitely lose her," Miles pointed out softly. Their eyes met, and in that moment, the connection between them deepened. Here was someone who understood, who saw past the statistics and success rates to the heart of what mattered. "You really believe we can do this?" Leanie asked, allowing her uncertainty to show. Miles nodded, his faith in her evident in every line of his face. "I believe you can do anything you set your mind to, Dr. Harker." The sincerity in his voice made her chest tight for entirely different reasons than exhaustion. Before she could respond, the kitten let out another labored breath, reminding them both of the stakes at hand. Leanie turned back to the x-rays, studying them with renewed determination. The surgery would be unprecedented, the chances of success minimal. But as she watched the tiny creature fighting for each breath, she knew she had no choice. She couldn't give up, not on this kitten, and not on herself. The weight of the challenge ahead pressed down on her shoulders. But for the first time since the lynx incident, she felt truly certain of her path. With Miles's quiet support beside her, she began to plan what could either be her greatest achievement or her most devastating failure. The fluorescent lights of the wildlife hospital cast harsh shadows. As Leanie hunched over her computer, her tired eyes scanning medical journals, page after page showed the same thing. No documented cases of successful ribcage reconstruction in animals this small. Her coffee had gone cold hours ago. Forgotten as she delved deeper into her research. There has to be something, she whispered, rubbing her temples. The stack of printed papers beside her told a story of desperation, experimental techniques, theoretical approaches, even human infant surgeries that might be adapted. But everything seemed too risky, too uncertain. Miles appeared at her door, carrying 2 fresh cups of coffee. Thought you could use this, he said softly, placing one beside her. Dark circles under his eyes matched her own. He'd been staying late, helping with the kitten's care. Thanks. Leanie took a grateful sip. I keep hitting dead ends. The smallest successful case I can find was on a 6-month-old cat. Our little one isn't even half that size. But you're not giving up, Miles stated. It wasn't a question. I can. Leanie turned her computer screen to show him a 3-dimensional scan of the kitten's ribcage. The malformation was clearly visible, a severe depression that pressed against the tiny lungs. Every breath is a struggle. Without surgery, she couldn't finish the sentence. Miles leaned in, studying the image. What about Dr. Chen's microsurgical techniques? The ones she used on bird wings? I've thought about that. It's risky. One wrong move and Leanie's voice cracked. The weight of her previous failure with the links pressed down on her shoulders. If she attempted the surgery and failed, it wouldn't just be the kitten's life at stake. Her career, everything she'd worked for, could end in that operating room. A commotion from the recovery ward interrupted their discussion. They rushed to the kitten's enclosure, where the tiny creature lay gasping, its sides heaving with each labored breath. Leanie's hands shook as she administered oxygen, whispering gentle encouragement until the episode passed. They're getting worse, Miles observed quietly. I know. Leanie stroked the kitten's fur with one finger, feeling its racing heart. We're running out of time. Heavy footsteps in the hallway announced Kessler's approach before he appeared. His face set in lines of disapproval. Dr. Harker, a word? His tone left no room for argument. In his office, Kessler's demeanor was cold and calculating. This has gone on long enough, he stated, shuffling through papers on his desk. The board is questioning our resource allocation. We have other cases, important cases, that need attention. The kitten is important, Leanie countered, her voice steady despite her racing heart. It's a lost cause, and you know it. Kessler's words cut like ice. I've scheduled a review panel for tomorrow morning. They'll make the final decision, but I think we both know what they'll say. He smiled thinly. It's for the best, really. Better to end things humanely than prolong the inevitable. Leanie's hands clenched into fists. You're going behind my back to have the kitten euthanized. I'm protecting this hospital's interest, and frankly, protecting you from yourself. He leaned forward. Don't throw away your career on this, Lenora. Not after the Lynx incident. You're still vulnerable. One more high-profile failure could end everything. She left his office in a daze, finding Miles waiting anxiously in the hallway. As she related Kessler's plans, she saw the same anger she felt reflected in the young intern's eyes. He can't do this. Miles protested. He can. Unless, Leanie paused, her mind racing. Unless we try the surgery tonight. Tonight? But you said you weren't sure about the technique. We're out of options. They walked back to the recovery ward where the kitten lay sleeping fitfully. Its breathing was shallow, each inhale a visible struggle. If we wait for the review panel, Kessler wins. The kitten dies. If we try the surgery, she met Miles's gaze. At least we give it a chance. Miles studied her face for a long moment, then nodded. I'm with you. Whatever you need. Leanie felt a wave of gratitude for his unwavering support. She turned back to the kitten, watching its tiny chest rise and fall in its uneven rhythm. The fear was still there. Fear of failure. Fear of losing everything. But something else was stronger now. A determination that burned through the doubt. Start prepping the surgical suite. She instructed Miles. I need to review Dr. Chen's papers one more time and modify the procedure for our patient. As Miles hurried off, Leanie gently lifted the kitten from its enclosure. It barely stirred, too weak now for its usual protest. Hold on, little one, she whispered. I'm not giving up on you. Not now, not ever. The weight of the moment pressed down on her, the impossible odds, the risk to her career, Kessler's opposition, and most of all, the fragile life literally in her hands. But as she watched the kitten fight for each breath, she knew there was only one choice she could live with. Time was running out. The surgery would either save them both or end everything. But sitting back and watching the kitten die slowly was no longer an option. Leanie set the kitten back in its enclosure and turned to her desk, pulling out Dr. Chen's surgical notes. She had hours of preparation ahead, and not a minute to waste. Miles Ortega's hands trembled as he held the medical order form. The stark black text seemed to swim before his eyes. Euthanasia scheduled. Subject: Bobcat Kitten underweight, malformed. Date: Thursday 1400 hours. His stomach dropped. Thursday, the exact day Dr. Harker was scheduled to speak at the Wildlife Veterinary Conference. 2 hours away, the hospital corridors felt unusually cold as he hurried through them, clutching the damning paper. He found Leanie in the recovery ward, measuring formula for the tiny bobcat. The kitten lay curled in its warming bed, its breaths coming in visible, struggling movements. Dr. Harker, Miles whispered urgently, "We need to talk." In private, Leanie looked up, startled by his tone. She followed him to the empty break room, where Miles closed the door with shaking fingers. "Kessler's going to kill the kitten," he blurted out, thrusting the form toward her. "He's scheduled it for Thursday, when you'll be away at the conference." The color drained from Leanie's face as she read the order. Her hands clenched the paper, crumpling its edges. "He didn't even have the decency to tell me to my face." Her voice was barely audible, choked with fury and hurt. "What are you going to do?" Miles asked, his young face etched with concern. Leanie's jaw set in a hard line. "I'm going to confront him, right now." She strode from the break room, still clutching the euthanasia order. She found Kessler in his office, reviewing donor reports behind his imposing mahogany desk. He looked up with mild irritation as she burst in without knocking. "Care to explain this?" Leanie slapped the crumpled form onto his desk. Kessler glanced at it dismissively. "Standard protocol for non-viable cases. You've been informed repeatedly that continuing treatment is a waste of resources. You were going to wait until I was gone." Leanie's voice shook with rage. "You didn't even have the courage to face me about it, Dr. Harker." Kessler's tone grew sharp. "Your emotional attachment to this case has become problematic. You're letting sentiment cloud your professional judgment." "My judgment?" Leanie's laugh was bitter. "You're the one sneaking around, plotting to euthanize a patient behind the attending physician's back." Kessler stood slowly, his height intimidating as he towered over his desk. "Let me be perfectly clear. That kitten is taking up valuable space and resources. Its chances of survival are minimal. I have a responsibility to this facility's reputation and efficiency. You have a responsibility to life." Leanie shot back. "Every life, no matter how small or challenging. That's what this hospital is supposed to stand for. Don't lecture me about principles, Dr. Harker." Kessler's voice turned dangerous. "Yet I remind you that your position here is precarious. After the Lynx incident, don't you dare throw that in my face." Leanie cut him off. "That has nothing to do with this. It has everything to do with this. You're overcompensating, trying to save this impossible case to make up for your past failure." His words struck like physical blows. "Well, I won't let your guilt complex jeopardize this facility's operations. The euthanasia will proceed as scheduled." Leanie straightened her spine, meeting his cold gaze. "No, it won't. Excuse me? I'm going to perform corrective surgery on the kitten's ribcage." Kessler's laugh was sharp and dismissive. "That's absurd. No one has ever successfully performed such a procedure on an animal that small. You'll kill it on the table. Maybe. But at least I'll have tried to save its life instead of throwing it away. This is your final warning, Dr. Harker." Kessler leaned forward, his knuckles white on his desk. "If you attempt the surgery against my direct orders, I will have your license revoked. Is that clear?" Leanie felt an odd calm settle over her. "The choice wasn't really a choice at all. Crystal clear," she replied. "And I don't care. I'm doing the surgery." She turned and walked out, leaving Kessler sputtering threats behind her. In the hallway, she found Miles waiting anxiously. "You heard?" she asked. He nodded, his face pale, but determined. "Every word. He can't do this. He can, and he will. Unless we stop him." Leanie's mind was already racing, forming plans. "I'll need your help, Miles. This won't be easy, and it could cost you your internship." Miles didn't hesitate. "I'm with you, Dr. Harker. All the way." Leanie felt a surge of gratitude for this young man's unwavering support. She glanced through the window of the recovery ward, where the tiny bobcat lay fighting for every breath. In that moment, she knew with absolute certainty that she was doing the right thing. "Then we'd better get started," she said. "We have a lot of preparation to do, and not much time to do it." They walked together toward the recovery ward, their steps purposeful. The battle lines had been drawn. For Leanie, it was no longer just about saving one small life. It was about standing up for everything She believed in as a doctor and a human being. Whatever the cost, she would not back down. The surgical preparation room hummed with nervous energy as Leanie laid out the tiny instruments she'd spent days modifying. Her hands moved with deliberate care across the sterile steel table. Arranging forceps, she carefully filed down a pinpoint precision and hemostats she'd adjusted to. Close, with the gentlest pressure. These sutures are the smallest I could find, Miles said, placing a package beside her. I had to call 6 different suppliers. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. Evidence of countless late nights spent helping her prepare. Leanie nodded, her throat tight with gratitude. Thank you, Miles. I don't know how I would have managed without you. The clock on the wall read 11:30 in the evening. The hospital corridors outside were quiet. Most staff long gone home. But here in this small room, Leanie and Miles worked with intense focus, their dedication burning bright against the growing opposition. They faced. Let's run through the procedure again, Leanie said, picking up a tiny practice model they'd crafted to match the kitten's dimensions. Her fingers traced the spot where they would need to make the first incision. The ribcage malformation means we have exactly 3 millimeters of margin for error. Miles leaned in, his expression serious. I've been studying those research papers you found. The technique they used on larger cats, we'll need to modify it significantly. They worked through the night, practicing each delicate movement until their hands ached. When something didn't feel right, they adjusted their approach, refined their technique, tried again. The stack of empty coffee cups grew taller as midnight turned to 1. Then 2 in the morning. Double quotes, Dr. Kessler's wrong about you, Miles said suddenly, breaking their focused silence. About this being unprofessional or emotional, I've never seen anyone prepare more thoroughly. Leanie's hands stilled over the practice model. I keep thinking about that lynx, she admitted quietly. Everyone said that was impossible to. Maybe. They were right. This is different, Miles insisted, his voice firm. You're different. You've thought of everything, planned for every possibility. As dawn approached, they could hear the earliest staff beginning to arrive. Whispers and pointed looks followed them as they gathered their supplies. Word had spread about the surgery, and the air was thick with judgment. Did you hear? One technician murmured to another as Leanie passed. She's actually going through with it. That tiny thing won't survive 10 minutes under anesthesia. Leanie's jaw tightened, but she kept walking. Miles fell into step beside her, his presence steady and reassuring. The preparation for surgery was meticulous. Every piece of equipment had to be perfectly calibrated for an animal fraction of the normal size. The heating pad was set to maintain the kitten's temperature with extreme precision. The anesthesia calculations had been checked and rechecked dozens of times. Vital signs stable. Miles reported as they finished settling the tiny patient. The kitten looked impossibly small on the operating table, his chest rising and falling. In shallow breaths, Leanie took a deep breath, aware of the weight of this moment. Through the observation window, she could see several staff members gathering to watch, their expressions ranging from curiosity to obvious skepticism. Dr. Kessler stood among them, his arms crossed and face set in stern disapproval. Beginning primary incision, Leanie announced, her voice steady despite her racing heart. The first cut had to be perfect. To shallow would waste precious time. To deep could be instantly fatal. The minutes stretched into hours as she worked, every movement measured and precise. Sweat trickled down her temple, but she couldn't spare a hand to wipe it away. Miles anticipated her needs perfectly, having instruments ready before she could ask. Blood pressure dropping, he warned at one point, his voice tight with concern. Leanie's hands remained steady as she adjusted her technique. Come on, little fighter, she whispered, stay with us. The surgery demanded everything she had, all her skill, all her focus, all her determination. Each suture was smaller than any she'd ever attempted. Each movement a dance between necessity and impossibility. The kitten's heart, visible through the tiny opening, looked no bigger than a raspberry. They're saying this can't be done, Miles had told her during their preparation. But they don't know you like I do. Those words echoed in her mind now as she worked, giving her strength when fatigue threatened to shake her hands. The kitten's life hung by a thread, but she refused to let that thread break. Hours passed in a haze of intense concentration. The observation window had filled with more spectators, drawn by the unprecedented nature of the surgery. But Leanie remained, focused only on the tiny life before her, on each careful stitch and precise adjustment. Final suture, she announced, her voice hoarse from the long silence. The last stitch needed to be as perfect as the first. One small mistake now could undo everything. Miles stood ready with the bandages they'd specially prepared, cut down to fit the kitten's tiny frame. His faith in her had never wavered, even when her own threatened to crumble. The room held its breath as Leanie tied off the last suture. The kitten's vital signs remained stable and possibly wonderfully stable. But they all knew the next 24 hours would be critical. The surgery might be over, but the fight for survival was far from finish. The surgery had reached its most delicate stage when Leanie felt the first wave of dizziness hit her. Her vision blurred slightly, the tiny surgical field swimming before her eyes. She blinked hard, trying to force herself to focus, but 36 hours without sleep was taking its toll. Dr. Harker. Miles's voice seemed to come from far away. Are you all right? Her hands began to tremble, a surgeon's worst nightmare. The tiny instruments she held suddenly felt impossibly heavy. The room tilted sideways, and she swayed on her feet. I can't, she whispered, horror creeping into her voice. I can't steady my hands. Before she could fall, Miles was there, his firm grip on her elbow anchoring her. Take a breath, he instructed quietly, positioning himself to block the view from the observation window. Just one deep breath. Leanie closed her eyes for a brief moment, drawing an air that felt thick with fear. When she opened them again, Miles had a surgical stool ready behind her. Sit, he said. We'll adjust the table height. No one out there needs to know. She sank onto the stool, grateful for his quick thinking. The dizziness began to recede, but the trembling in her hands persisted. If I make one wrong move now. She couldn't finish the thought. You won't, Miles said with quiet certainty. He moved closer, a steady presence at her shoulder giving her strength. We've come too far to fail. Leanie forced herself to focus on the tiny chest cavity before her. The malformed ribcage looked even more fragile under the surgical lights. Each suture had to be perfect. There would be no second chances. The monitors beeped steadily as she continued her work, Miles anticipating her every need. His unwavering support helped steady her hands, but exhaustion still pulled at her leg. A physical weight. Then it happened. The steady beeping of the heart monitor suddenly changed its rhythm. Leanie's head snapped up as the erratic pattern filled the room. No, she breathed. No. The kitten's tiny heart, visible through the surgical opening, began to flutter irregularly. The beats grew weaker, more sporadic. Blood pressure dropping rapidly, Miles reported, his voice tight with tension. Leanie's fingers flew over the surgical site, searching for the cause. Had a suture torn? Was there hidden bleeding she'd missed? The kitten's life signs continued to deteriorate as precious seconds ticked by. Then the worst sound imaginable filled the operating room. The sustained tone of a flat line. The silence that followed was deafening. Through the observation window, Leanie could sense the collective intake of breath, could practically hear the whispered I told you so's. She stared at the motionless form before her. So tiny and still, the failure she'd been dreading crashed over her like a wave, threatening to drown her completely. The lynx's death flashed through her mind, another impossible case, another life she couldn't save. Dr. Harker. Miles's voice broke through her paralysis. Leanie, we're not done yet. But she couldn't move, couldn't tear her eyes away from the flat line on the monitor. I failed, she whispered, again. They were right all along. No, Miles said firmly. His hand found her shoulder, squeezing gently. Look at how far we've come. Look at everything this little fighter has survived. We're not giving up now. The kitten lay still on the table, its partially repaired ribcage a testament to how close they'd come to success. All their preparation, all their late nights of practice, all their defiance of the odds, was it all for nothing? Through the fog of despair, Leanie became aware of Miles moving, preparing the smallest defibrillator paddles they had. His refusal to give up penetrated her darkness like a shaft of light. The monitoring equipment continued its mournful tone, marking each second that slipped away. In the observation window, Dr. Kessler's expression was a mixture of pity and vindication. But Miles stood steady beside her, ready to continue fighting. Leanie stared at the tiny lifeless form before her, teetering on the edge of complete devastation. Everything she'd feared, everything she'd fought against, seemed to be coming true in this moment. The weight of failure pressed down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. Then, through the crushing silence, a sound so soft it might have been. Imagine a tiny gasp. Ellie and I froze, hardly daring to breathe. There it was again, a small, stuttering intake of air. The monitor's harsh tone broke into a beep. Then another, and another. Oh my God, Miles whispered, leaning closer to the operating table. Dr. Harker, look. The kitten's chest rose and fell with shallow but steady breaths. The surgical repairs were holding, allowing its lungs to expand properly for perhaps the first time in its life. The heart monitor displayed a strengthening rhythm, each peak and valley a defiant declaration of survival. Leanie's hands trembled as she checked the vital signs. Temperature stabilizing, she reported, voice thick with emotion. Blood pressure coming up. Oxygen levels. She blinked hard at the readings. Oxygen levels better than they've ever been. Miles broke into a wide grin, exhaustion forgotten in the miracle of the moment. We did it. We actually did it. The door burst open with a bang that made them both jump. Dr. Warren Kessler stood in the doorway, his normally immaculate appearance disheveled, face flushed with anger. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, striding into the operating room. "I explicitly forbade this procedure. Dr. Harker, you are in direct violation of..." His voice died as he reached the table. The kitten lay peaceful now, its breathing visible and steady. The monitors showed strong vital signs. The impossible surgery had succeeded. That's... Kessler swallowed hard. "That's not possible." "Apparently it is," Leanie said quietly, still monitoring the kitten's recovery. The ribcage reconstruction was successful. The breathing difficulties should resolve completely as healing progresses. Before Kessler could respond, his phone buzzed, then buzzed again, and again. He pulled it out, frowning at the screen. The local news picked up the story, Miles explained, unable to keep the satisfaction from his voice. "Someone leaked that we were attempting groundbreaking microsurgery on the world's smallest wildcat patient." The video of the kitten's rescue went viral an hour ago. Kessler's face paled as he scrolled through his messages. The donors, he muttered, are very interested in our innovative surgical techniques. Leanie finished for him. "I imagine they're quite excited about supporting a facility capable of such cutting-edge wildlife medicine." The hospital director looked up, meeting Leanie's steady gaze. The power dynamics had shifted, and they both knew it. He couldn't move against her now without risking the very funding he'd accused her of threatening. His own arguments about waste and liability had been transformed into proof of short-sightedness. Kessler straightened his tie, composing himself. "I will need a full report on the procedure and recovery protocols by tomorrow morning." He turned on his heel and strode out, but his usual commanding presence had deflated considerably. As the door swung shut behind him, Miles let out a low whistle. That was beautiful. Leanie finally allowed herself to smile as she gently adjusted the kitten's warming blanket. "The only thing that matters is that our little fighter here proved everyone wrong. Sometimes the smallest lives teach us the biggest lessons." Through the observation window, they could see staff gathering, phones held up to capture photos of the historic moment. The tiny kitten that had been dismissed as hopeless had just changed everything: protocols, possibilities, and most importantly, perspectives. But for Leanie, watching the steady rise and fall of that tiny chest, the victory was far more personal. In saving this one small life, she had rediscovered her own strength, her own worth. The darkness of past failure had been transformed into the light of new beginning. The kitten slept on, unaware it had just made medical history concerned only with the simple miracle of breathing freely at last. The autumn air carried a crisp bite as Leanie watched the Bobcat Kitten, no longer tiny, pace its recovery and closure. 6 weeks had transformed the fragile creature into a fierce young wildcat, its muscles rippling beneath spotted fur that gleamed with health. Each confident step erased the memory of those desperate nights when its survival had hung by a thread. "Hard to believe this is the same little fighter," Miles said softly, standing close enough that his shoulder brushed against hers. Their hands found each other naturally, fingers intertwining with the easy familiarity born of countless shared vigils. Leanie smiled, feeling the warmth of both the morning sun and Miles's presence. "Look at those eyes," she said. "They've got fire in them now." The kitten demonstrated her point by letting out a warning growl, baring impressive teeth at them through the mesh. Gone was the helpless infant that had needed constant care. In its place stood a wild creature ready to reclaim its birthright. The past weeks had brought changes beyond just the kitten's recovery. Dr. Kessler had gradually withdrawn from daily operations, his influence waning as news of the groundbreaking surgery spread through veterinary circles. Donors now requested Leanie specifically for tours and consultations, drawn by her reputation for refusing to give up on the seemingly hopeless cases. "The transport team will be here in 30 minutes, Miles reminded her gently. "Are you ready?" Leanie nodded, though her heart squeezed at the thought of saying goodbye. "More than ready. This is what we've worked for all along." They prepared the transport cage with practiced efficiency, their movements synchronized after so many weeks of working side by side. Their relationship had deepened gradually, built on shared determination and quiet moments of understanding. Neither needed to speak of it like the kitten's recovery. It had grown naturally into something strong and true. The release site had been carefully chosen, a protected stretch of wilderness far from hunting grounds. As their vehicle bumped along the forest road, Leanie found herself reflecting on how much had changed. The weight of the failed Lynx case no longer pressed so heavily on her shoulders. That loss would always be part of her story, but it no longer defined her. Here we are, Miles announced, pulling to a stop in a small clearing. The morning mist was just lifting, revealing tall pines and rocky outcrops. Perfect bobcat territory. They carried the transport cage together, setting it down in a patch of dappled sunlight. The kitten inside had gone completely still, its keen senses already attuned to the wild surroundings. Remember when its chest would barely rise? Miles asked softly. When we had to feed it with an eyedropper every 2 hours, Leanie nodded, her throat tight with emotion. Now look at it, strong enough to snarl at us, ready to hunt. They stepped back, and Leanie reached for the cage door. For a moment, she hesitated, her hand resting on the latch. All those nights of worry, the battles with Kessler, the terrifying surgery. It all came down to this moment. You did it, Leanie, Miles whispered. You proved them all wrong. She lifted the latch. The door swung open. For several heartbeats, nothing happened. Then, like liquid shadow, the bobcat flowed from the cage. It paused briefly. Muscles coiled before taking its first steps on wild soil. Its head lifted, nose testing the wind, ear swiveling to catch every sound of its new domain. Without warning, it bounded forward. In 3 powerful leaps, it reached the edge of the clearing. There it paused, turning back one final time. Its golden eyes met Leanie's, and in that moment, she saw something that made her breath catch. Not the fragile infant she had saved, but a magnificent wild creature, exactly as nature intended. Then it was gone, vanishing into the underbrush as if it had never been anything but wild and free. Leanie felt Miles's arms slip around her waist, supporting her as she trembled with the weight of the moment. That's what impossible looks like, he said softly. She leaned into his embrace, understanding now what she hadn't 6 weeks ago. The real triumph hadn't just been saving the kitten's life. It had been rediscovering her own strength, her own wild heart, and fighting for the tiny creature's right to survive. She had reclaimed her purpose and found something more precious still. The courage to believe in impossible things. Ready to head back? Miles asked after a long moment. Leanie took one last look at the forest where her smallest patient had disappeared. Yes, she said firmly. There's work to be done. Other lives to save. They walked back to the vehicle hand in hand, leaving behind the empty cage as morning sunlight filtered through the trees. Somewhere in those shadows, a once impossible miracle, prowled free, while the woman who had saved it carried her own freedom back down the mountain. If this story found you at the right moment, subscribe and stay close. Tomorrow's may be the reminder you didn't know you needed.